In 2026, the old business playbook hasn't just changed, it's been thrown out the window. We're looking at a $10 trillion shift in the global economy. But here's the problem. For every company successfully using AI, a dozen others are still trying to run 21st century intelligence on a 20th century mindset. The tools are ready, but our organizations aren't. Welcome to the AI Value Paradox. Today we are sitting down with Dr. Garth Andrus, who has spent his career leading massive digital and human capital transformations. We are opening the vault on the structural imagination crisis, the legacy logic paradox, and the anatomy misalignment that is leaving even the most advanced CEOs blind to their own company's evolution. At Kategos, we are the architects of transformation. We don't just deploy technology, we redesign the DNA of work. Let's head into the war room and look at how to rewire the enterprise for the age of intelligence.
Welcome to Kategos Deep Dive. This is our first live podcast episode of Kategos AI Value Paradox series. We have a very special guest on our show today, Dr. Garth Andrus. He is head of AI and digital transformation at Anderson Consulting and has held many positions previously with Deloitte and Accenture Life. Dr. Andrus, today we want to talk about and have a conversation on the very question that every CEO and CIO is asking about the AI implementation and adoption in their organization. So I'm going to start with some really hard-hitting questions right off the bat. And you've led digital and human capital transformation for years. And what was that aha moment when you realized that AI wasn't just another tech rollout, but something that required a total rethink of transformation agenda? And welcome to our show.
Well, thank you, Puneet. Great question. I think it's definitely been an evolution. So I think I maybe mentioned to you a while back that way back in my past, when I did my doctoral dissertation at Vanderbilt University, I did it in AI. And that was a really interesting time because it was really the beginning and the early stages of that. In fact, it was focused on expert systems, right? And that was the area. And then for many years, it was dead. It didn't really move a lot for quite a number of years. And then it started coming into much more machine learning and a lot of different things along the way. And I started noticing little differences along that path. And then as we got closer into the 20 teens, we started to see a lot of different AI applications and things being done in companies. And that's when I really started saying, not just AI, but digital in general, digital technologies. This is really changing a lot of things that we are used to doing in new ways. And then in 2023, when Gen AI came out, it just exploded. And so at that point, I realized it was massively changing things that in organizations that were typically left alone, even when you put in AI. So I think in 2023, we all recognized when we got all the large language models and generative AI coming in, that this was enormously impactful to businesses. Included, it changes things like decision rights, workflow, structure in organizations, and many others, which we can talk about today. But those are a few, and that's when I recognized even more that this is even changing even more dramatically.
You mentioned since 2022 or 2024, we've seen a drastic change in the talent transformation practice in the industry as we see it. How has the definition of successful transformation changed in the last 24 months? What have you seen that has really been impactful, and what's working for the enterprise at the moment?
So that's a great question. So one of my first things that I do when I talk to companies is I say, please don't treat this as a technology implementation. A technology implementation typically has a beginning and an end, and usually weaves into the existing organizational structure. You're not really changing massive things. You're going to change adoption and some things like that. But with AI, with generative AI, it doesn't end. And what you start with, what you end up deploying may look completely different 6 months from then. So I think that is such a big difference in anything that any company has ever done in the past, because we're going from this sort of finite, I put in something and it's going to act this way, to I'm going to put in something and it's going to act in ways we've never even seen before. and it's going to keep changing as we go along. So the biggest difference is AI doesn't end. A traditional technology implementation might end and then maybe have some updates occasionally. AI can be updates every day
Right. I
and
think we're
change.
just getting started on AI.
Just getting
We haven't even seen the real impact of AI yet, because we, as an AI native firm, we are very focused on AI driven solutions, AI driven processes and outcomes. And oftentimes we figure out that AI is not all that smart yet. You still have to have that human in the loop constantly. And in your research, you mentioned that organizations are often built to fail at AI. What are the quietest, most invisible ways that traditional incentives or organizational structures act as a immune system, rejecting AI value? If you can talk about that a little.
Yeah, I like your analogy of the immune system. It's a really good analogy. And you and I have talked about this before. We have what I call a pre-AI DNA. And that is just the way we've always been doing work in businesses. But it's not about changing the organization to just dramatically going into a new way of doing things. It has to be done in a particular way. So in a pre-AI DNA, companies are acting the way they've done for many years, which have multiple levels of decision rights. So usually you make a decision, it needs to get approval and go up the scale to approval. So one of the biggest things that AI does is that democratizes decision making. And if you don't change decision rights, you're literally strangling or crushing your AI investment, because part of what you're doing with generative AI is you're allowing other people to make decisions. And now with it, to where we're at now with agents, and as agents start to come into play in organizations, now you've got that dynamic. So agents make decisions and humans are in the loop on especially in the early stages of those. But we're going to get to the point, and we are in some areas already, where the agents are making decisions. So what decision rights do they have,
G-
right? And how do we deploy that?
That's a,
And so
that's a huge question.
yeah, so hopefully that's one area. The other is structure. I think in many cases AI is, when we put in traditional technologies, cloud, ERP, et cetera, it fit into our existing organizational structure. AI is making that so that the structure itself is actually going to become a barrier to speed, to scaling, and to even talent growth and talent attraction. So you get into an organization that has multiple layers. You're not going to take a huge company that has 12 or 14 layers of hierarchy like some of the big Fortune 500 have and go in one day and say, okay, now you're going to be 4 layers. They're going to kick you out of the room. But you can change decision rights within those layers. And eventually the organization will see, because of AI, that many of those layers are completely unnecessary, and companies are already in some cases starting to weave out those layers that they don't need anymore, because AI is actually enabling different ways of interacting in the company, different ways of operating.
Got you. We talked about pilot purgatory in one of our white papers that we published, and you talked about it. And I remember your speech at the AI conference last year, which was quite impressive. And so many takeaways from that conversation that we had. And where the tech works, where do you think the tech works is dying? Is it in production, or is it where do you think AI is failing for most of the enterprise at the moment?
So if I understand right, this would be where, though they're worried about failing, that's one. So for example, you get error messages in a traditional technology. With AI, you don't get error messages. It may be confidently wrong, and everybody go down that path of this confident error. And so that's one area that companies are definitely concerned about. How do I know if this is hallucinating, or how do I know if it's repeating or pulling things from the right places and giving me the right answer? So in the beginning, we're going to see a lot more human in the loop until we're comfortable with that, as well as this, how it's changed over the last 3 years. Think of the amount of hallucination that we had in the beginning and how much there is now. they've actually shown that there's dramatically pushed out
Big reduction,
hallucination.
big reduction and
Yeah.
hallucination, absolutely. And one thing I think when it comes to a good AI stack, I think it is very critical for us to make sure that our data, which drives purely any outcomes that we are looking for, how important and how valuable do you think is data to this entire enterprise implementation of AI or adoption of AI?
Yes, and I know we've spent years in the past in technology trying to make sure our data is clean and make sure that data is speaking from one system to another in the right ways. But as there's new ways with AI and there's companies that have arisen that focus on stitching that together with AI and not always having to have completely clean data in the way that we may have thought about it in the past. Maybe there's somewhere in between the middle of that where some of the data can be clean, some of it can be then pulled through AI in ways where it can actually go in and pull the right data out and then connect the pieces. So I think and that'll continue to change and morph, but data is very important. If we don't have the right data, we don't have anything that's valuable. So
That's true. That is true. And I think it's a lot of enterprise. I want to step back to your conference and one of the very first picture you had a Pratt and Whitney or a Rolls Royce engine on top of a horse cart. And I talk about that example with so many people. I said, you need to understand what you're building your AI infrastructure on top of. If you're just trying to put a Ferrari on a road that's not meant for Ferrari, you're going to either break the Ferrari or you're going to bust both of the roads and yourself. I want to talk about the structural imagination and recoding of the enterprise DNA. So for CEOs that are listening right now, what is one thing they're likely aren't seeing about how does the AI fundamentally reshapes their company totally?
sure. So a DNA of an organization is really how it's organized, how it's operating, and how it behaves. So it's going to change. AI is changing something in each one of those areas, right? Multiple things in each one of these areas. It's going to change structure, which we just mentioned. You may be structured very differently because of AI. It's going to change leadership skills. That's something that we're doing right now. We did research. I'm going to delve off into this for 1 second because it's really important. I did a meta-analysis of over 50 peer-reviewed journal articles from 2023 to 2026, and all on what's keeping AI from getting to scale in companies and getting the ROI that they want. And interestingly enough, it came out and it says, and the data really showed that it was leaders' inability to execute in this new environment. Number one thing, actually stalling. So I would say one of the things that CEOs need to be thinking about is, do I have leaders in place who are still thinking about our pre-AI DNA and are operating that way? Or are there new skills that they can develop about how do they execute AI? And one of those you mentioned was structural imagination. That's one of the areas we found in that research. So structural imagination is, as a leader, can I understand what I need to change in workflow, structure, decision rights, governance, and those types of things that are aligning to AI and where AI is at today. So I think there's quite a number of things. We could do a whole entire podcast just on those areas, but I won't go too deep because I have an analysis where I can actually analyze those areas from the pre to the post and then map where there's are going to collide with the current organization and what you can do about it to change those things.
So, can you give me an example of a certain specific workflow that was traditionally human led, but then was driven by AI, or it has gone through the structural change that you talk about and looked completely different after it has been redesigned?
Sure. I think one of the easiest ones, and let's use this as like maybe the low hanging fruit, is in recruiting. Everything used to be manual and so forth. And now that's completely rewired. That whole entire process has changed completely. And that comes with its own problems. Now, you have bad actors in that. You have all sorts of people just using AI to actually go apply and things like that. So that one has changed the work process. I think there is in day-to-day, there's a lot in the HR function, I would say, a lot. So you could take almost any of the processes in HR, and as AI has actually has been put in, a lot of things have changed in that. So one of the areas I've seen the most in is in learning. How do we learn? We don't go to classes anymore, and it's not just about finding the right tools out there. It's about individualized learning. That's one of the biggest things that are changing. People are getting very individualized learning through AI of just what they need to know when they need to know it. And you can personalize that. Here's what I want to know. Here's how I want to find those things for me. Just give me the 15 minutes. Give me the great podcast like your podcast, whatever it is that I'm going to get that I need right now. So those are a couple. Those are a couple kind of HR process. You can do on the business side as well. And we're starting to see lots of those changes. We were just working with a pharmaceutical company that was looking at how do we actually identify all the assets that we have in the company, those assets, those physical assets within a production facility, and put a number against those things and so forth. They do that all manually. Now that's all done by AI. So the whole job flow process has changed. The skills needed for that has changed. How many people they need for that has changed. That's just one example. There's so many business solutions on these that you could go into.
And we're seeing that too. Oftentimes, I'm seeing that leaders are implementing AI tools, but they're forgetting or they're not getting the right measure of the outcomes. Is there something that you're seeing right now that where is that missing connection? What are we not doing
Yes.
right at this moment?
So that's a really great question. And I've actually thought quite a bit about this. So we did traditional business cases looking at value, right, for software. Here's how much it's going to cost. Here's how much the licenses are going to be. Here's what we expect in improvement and process and so forth. And it's pretty predictive, right? If you take that same approach and you apply that to AI, in most cases, you're going to be completely off, right? So I look at this as three different ways to look at a business case in AI. And that business case would be, there's three areas. So the first area is I'm going to take a process and I'm going to use AI to make that process faster. Now that could probably still do a little bit with our traditional ROI, right? And that's where a lot of AI is today. People are taking existing process. How do I use AI to make it faster, cheaper, less steps, etc. Once you get to the second one is really looking at, hey, why are we even doing it this way? Why don't we think of another way to do this process? And as you do that, you're inventing a new way to do something. Very hard to put an ROI on that exactly, but there's some elements of traditional ROI you can put on that, and others you're going to discover there's new ways to do things, and you're going to create some adjacent opportunities that you never even thought of. So how do you put an ROI on that? You've got to be able to adjust the way you think about the ROI in that. The third piece is, hey, why are we even doing this? Not just why are we doing this differently or doing it faster, but why are we even doing this? Isn't there a completely other way to look at this? And those are the kind of the frontier thinking, right? Let me rethink how this is completely done and come up with something different. That requires a very ROI different approach, which could be the types of ideas that are used, how do we implement those, and so forth. So just using a traditional way to look at ROI is a challenge in AI, and you have to look at those three different categories of how you're going to apply that. Then you'll have much more realistic view. Because if you treat the other two from a traditional way, you're going to be very disappointed, and you're going to kill an opportunity that should have been and could have been amazing.
That is true.
Because you're not
That is so true. When you're building your AI strategies, I think it is important for us to build around the business constraints rather than the technology possibilities. And can you talk about that a little bit and share your viewpoint on why is it important to look at your business constraints rather than your technology possibilities?
So one I would say is your competitors are doing that. They're looking at things in new ways. There's going to be a lot of companies that are going to become obsolete because they're only looking at a traditional business case with a traditional technology or very simply along the way. Competitors are out there doing other things. They're actually out there. They have teams, and they're looking at this the way I was framing up the value proposition and how you have to look at business cases. Some companies are starting to structure themselves that way. This team that goes out there and looks for the infinite possibilities of AI, those that are looking at the existing things we're doing, and those that are looking at just rewiring what we do today. So I think you have to almost think of don't let that be an accident. Let that be intentional.
I like that. I think that's a great point. And we just want to fast forward a little bit into the future. What does an AI native operating model actually look like in 2030? And is it smaller teams,
That's a great.
flatter hierarchies, or something else entirely?
Yeah. So if you're asking if it's the traditional companies trying to then become that, that's one thing. And then the other thing is we have the companies that are coming up and that are native, completely native from the beginning, and they're looking at how they need to do this differently. So take the consulting firms, for example. They're going to look very different, and they're already starting to do that. They're looking completely, they're trying to figure out how do we do this apprenticeship model, knowing we don't need as many younger
Hmm.
people. So if you think intentionally about that, and this goes for not just consulting companies, but anything where there's sort of an apprenticeship type of model where you learn by doing, like in financial services and some of those things that you'd need to think through, you're going to need to look at those in how do we bring up that skill set from the bottom. If you're just looking at them as hired help to do the low level things AI can do now, then that's probably not the right answer. You may not be hiring as many of those. You may hire only a few, but you're doing it for the real intent of bringing them through sort of an apprenticeship approach. So now there's going to be a lot less organizations. If you're 12 levels of hierarchy in 2030, you're going to have a really hard time pivoting to the speed of AI and what's happening in the world. So we're going to have smaller. And I won't mention the companies, but an oil company has 12 levels of hierarchy from the CEO to the entry level. And I actually said that in one of the meetings. I said, we can't tell you're going to go from 12 to 4 overnight because you're not. And you know what they did? We created an edge organization. I think this is what you're going to see. So particular companies, you're going to see edge organizations, which are designing the way it should be and changing the governance, the policies, and so forth in that group to grow that. And then the other parts of the organization can start to adopt some of those same principles as they see this working in the organization. The thing that you have to do differently is you have to realize there's a mothership and there's the edge organization. And very often you have to share data, work processes in between them. So you have to be intentional about how you design that to make it work. And I've actually done that, and it can work. So for example, we were asking the mothership in this edge organization, we need this data turned around in 24 hours. And they said, oh no, that's going to take 2 weeks. And we had to actually negotiate with them and show them what value they would get by turning this around. And we were able to make that work. So there's going to be a lot of give and take on these. Then you look at companies like Block that are right now completely trying to reshift their business. And they're really pretty much a native AI organization, but they still have a lot of traditional ways of working, and they're working through that right now. I just listened to a podcast on that and with their CEO, and how it's a challenge, and it's a little bit of an experiment to some extent, and you have to try to work with some of those things and see how you can make them smaller. But the wholesale of I just want to put in AI, I'm going to get rid of a bunch of people, those organizations are still going to struggle because that's not the way to do this.
That's a great point. And I want to ask you a question leading out of this. How do humans and AI work as we go forward?
It's a great question. So I did write an article on AI as your coworker and how you have to think about that. So think about how challenging that is in an organization when you've made decisions. You may have even used AI, but not necessarily an agent. You may have used AI to give you information or your systems, your ERP, your cloud systems to do things, right? You've made those decisions. Now all of a sudden you have agents in there that are doing part of that job you used to do. So first of all, you have to redesign the jobs. So jobs are going to be continuously morphing and changing as this moves along. And I don't think it's going to stop. I think those jobs will always iterate. So if you're designing for something that's going to be stable, it's not going to work. You're going to design an agile type of approach to working with that agent. So the clarity comes when you create governance and decision right clarity, right? So how does a decision get made? Who's making it? What data does it come from? How do I know it's the right answer, and so forth? So if you don't distinguish those two things, you don't distinguish decision rights and governance, who makes decisions, what kind and how, and then the decision rights of I can make these decisions, can't make these decisions, the system can make these. If you do that, you will be able to work fairly well with that because it's another way to do your job better, and you're usually getting rid of things you didn't want to do in the first place or were challenging. In other ways, it allows you to be more creative. In many ways, if this is done right, it can really improve what the individual, the employee feels about the company because they're going to be able to do higher order things. But if you just take jobs away and parse things out, that's not going to work. So you have to think about this from a culture standpoint, what that does to the culture.
Right. Talking about dangerous things, what is the most dangerous myth currently circulating in the C-suite about AI? What are you hearing? I'm sure you meet all sorts of CXOs, CIOs. What's their fear?
I think a lot of it's outdated information of things they hear in the popular press about what's going to come and take my job. That's probably one of the biggest ones out there. And again, if you're a company that just wants to get rid of people, that's going to be true. But if you're a company that says, I want to build an incredibly powerful, strong culture and company, I'm going to do things a little bit differently. And therefore, it's important to know that job may go away. You may not go away, but many aspects of your job will go away. Almost every aspect of a job is going to change. And I think those that go in and say, we're not going to do that are totally mistaken. That almost every single job in a company, anything you can do sitting at a computer is going to be changed.
What is one structural move a leader should make in the next 90 days to prepare for this shift?
I don't think it's a preemptive structural move. I think it's a move very focused on chief AI officer that in our company always is very clear when we go to clients and says, we're not here to fix your technology. We're here to solve your business problem. And that's where we're going to focus. And I think that's what companies need to do is make sure they're really focusing on what are we really trying to do? What are the business objectives we're trying to do? And that's what we want to go after. And also, what does that implication have to do with what it does to our culture and our business? And then be able to make those choices together, the business objectives with the culture, and then you're going to know how to do this. But I wouldn't go and make preemptive structural moves. Those will come as we make the decisions on those two items. And you can make those very quickly. This isn't something that, and you may make them in an iterative way, not a wholesale, we're cutting this piece off. You may change certain things so that it keeps up with the speed of change and what people are able to manage as well.
Gotcha. So we heard a lot of structural changes. We know that a lot of technology changes. While we are not promoting technology changes, just like you are, we're talking about what are the outcomes you're looking to get using these newer technologies. Is the goal reduction of tech? Is it increasing efficiencies, redundancies, reducing redundancy? What is exactly that you're looking at, and how do we help you with that? Talking about those initial conversations, how hard have you seen this process or the sync that usually needs to happen within the C-suite for you to implement the AI?
I think in the beginning, everybody's focused on how do I take what I do and make it faster, better, cheaper. That's where the initial conversations are at. And that's okay. That's an okay place to start. But if that's only where you're at, then that's not gonna help in the long run, because somebody's gonna do the other two things we talked about, the more innovative things along the path. We are seeing that, and we're also seeing ones that say, hey, I want to even rethink what we do in this particular, let's say it's an offering or an approach, or how they do things, to completely rethink that. I think you see some of that, and I think it's almost like a funnel. This big funnel is on this end over here, or not. It's basically, that's the low-hanging fruit kind of focus for the most part. But I think what's going to happen, this is what I really think is going to happen. I think the 1 and 2 person and 10-person teams are going to come and shake up businesses so much that they're going to wonder what just happened. It reminds me of the old cartoons when you'd see Roadrunner flying by and everything spins around and everything. They're going to do this. What just happened? And they're going to be some 28-year-old kid with two other people, and they're going to put together something that you have, and they can replicate it like that. We've already seen that, right? We've already seen software, for example, that's been replicated over a weekend, right? And we're going to see business approaches where these entrepreneurial mindsets, it could be any age, by the way, but there is a lot of the younger ones happening, but it's happening all over at all age spectrums and all generations, where people are coming up with ideas. They're going to absolutely make a company obsolete or just completely lose massive parts of market share and so
Oh,
forth.
absolutely. In fact, we are hearing stories like Cursor, Lovable, and all these companies, great companies. They're all AI
Yeah.
driven, AI native, and small teams, and incredibly high revenues, and just using AI as their powerhouse engine that is leading this accelerated growth that they're all looking at. Now, how does
Yeah.
it equate for these are AI native companies? They know and do what they understand. How does a small and medium enterprise walk into a adoption of such a system? What do they need to do, and what do they need to think? And if our listeners out there want to know that one big step that they must take before a major AI adoption, what would it be?
I think that this goes back to the point of being willing to look at the possibilities, right? When we had traditional software, and we still do, we have traditional software, it's very clear what it is and what it's designed to solve and what it can do. And I think with a company like yours and ours and others that are out there that are coming in saying and looking at problems in a completely different way, I think the openness of the company to think that, hey, I should be open to what these possibilities are, because they're going to want to have that comfort level of, oh no, we've never done it that way. Oh no, that's not what we do, and so forth. So I think that willingness to listen to what the possibilities are is probably the number one thing for any organization, but especially a small, medium sized company, because in those companies, there's a lot of founders. We actually work with a lot of companies that are founders, and sometimes they just want to hold on and said, no, this is the way we've always done it. But I think that open-mindedness to come in and listen to others' ideas about where they can be and be willing to entertain those is going to be one of the best things that especially a small and medium-sized company can do.
Gotcha. And how critical is the whole concept of change management when it comes to AI, especially now more than ever?
So every podcast is now saying that. It used to be a little bit here and there. Now all of them are saying this is a change management problem. This is not a technology problem. We can solve that. This is a change management problem. We need to be able to change structure, process, governance, policies, performance management, rewards, how we learn, and all those types of things in with AI, because AI changes how all of those look. And if you're not looking at change management and you're just trying to put in a technology, it's not going to work. And I go back to my opening statement, which is AI is not, don't treat AI as a technology implementation. It's an organization transformation.
You're absolutely right. We just published one of our papers. It was Wealth of Nations, and we called it Wealth of Agents. And we wanted to make sure that the enterprise or the world really understands what we have seen over the last 100 years. Are we seeing another industrial revolution in shape of AI, or is this something we can relate to just another dot-com era transformation? If you can talk about a few points around
Yeah,
that.
sure. So my doctorate is in organization science. So I've focused on organizations as their evolution through history, industrial revolution, dot-com era, you name it, everything that's happened along the way. And anybody who's ever looked at that and compared to what's happening now will see that there's nothing, I don't think there's probably been anything in the history of mankind that's going to change more about not just business, but our lives every day. That is really where we're heading. It's going to change. It's going to change more. I love the statement that many people make. Today is the least amount of AI or the worst of AI you're ever going to have to deal with. And think of what we have already. The imagination and changes, it's every week, it's every day sometimes. The changes that are allowing us to be done. As Anthropic came out with this product that actually finds all the holes in security.
Mythos.
Where did that come from? That's a mind, somebody really thinking about a problem and looking outside to solve that. Now they've created something that can actually be a weapon in some ways, but is also a great savior to businesses for their vulnerabilities, right? And so that's just one example. And that thing's massive. Think of that. You can build an entire company off of that, just that one.
Mm-hmm.
And then when Level others came out where we could instantly model something we want to model, instantly make it work, create a dashboard in 3 hours.
Right.
That used to take 4 months. I'm so excited about all the possibilities. My mind is more excited about today and the future, where we're heading from the possibilities of business than it ever has been. We're going to be able to do things we never even thought of. So some people ask me, why don't you just stop? You've had a whole career. You could go fly fishing and be on the beach and things like that. And I said, you know what? This is the Super Bowl of business transformation. I don't want to be sitting in the stands. I want to be on the field in the game, because this is the most exciting thing ever to happen in the business world, ever.
That is so true. That is so true. And I totally agree with you. I think this is the best thing that humans have ever discovered. And I think we're only at the nascent stage of this evolution. You talked about vulnerabilities. We talked about mythos. Of course, that is just being one of the big gaping hole that Anthropic has exposed our world to. But let's talk about security and how important that entire business model is going to really work as a wrapper for everything AI, and how critical it is for us to secure our systems now more than ever before.
You've probably been asked this a million times. I have been asked a million times. I'm going into computer science. Is that the right thing? Or do I not have a job anymore? And so forth. And I said, if you want to go into cybersecurity, you're going to have a job for a very
For a very
long
long
time.
time.
Cybersecurity is the number one thing that people think about, right? It's big companies especially think about, how do I make sure my data is secure? How to make sure my people are secure? How do I also anticipate what those vulnerabilities might be?
Mhm.
And so those I think it's absolutely, we can't progress without the security that we need from having good cybersecurity. That will slow us down if we can't. And we will see big breaches. We will see a couple of things because AI opens that door to more possibilities of cybersecurity threats. Unbelievable what's going to happen. So you do want that, and you have you have Mythos and so forth coming from Anthropic and others, but you need the onesie twosie little vulnerability. Let's look at all those opportunities. Let's change that. Let's fix that. Let's preempt that. And it's companies need to be paying a lot of attention. I think most companies do. Small to medium-sized companies may be a little more vulnerable because they may not be thinking about that like a Citibank is thinking about that.
Absolutely. I'm a small businessman. And the modular nature of AI allows you to build systems like never before. And I think,
Right.
and that's where I think a lot of people they may be making a mistake. Yes, it helps you automate and increase your productivity for a short period of time, but it increases the vulnerability and exposure to your data and your enterprise health. I cannot even express the amount of the gravity of that threat, and we continue to expose ourselves to that. Yeah, while there are a lot of job losses, which we're going to talk about, I want to hear your take about all the noise that is being made about job noises, and then of course cybersecurity and areas where new jobs and opportunities are going to come out of. Just a little your view on
Sure.
that.
Since I spent a lot of time in that part of the world about thinking about people's jobs and roles and so forth in a company. And as I made the comment earlier, that jobs, if you're using a computer, and your job is going to change 100%. There will be jobs that could be completely automated, and those will go away. If a company's smart about this, Walmart is a good example of this. They basically said, we're not going to reduce headcount. As we find jobs that get eliminated, we're training those people into new roles and new job opportunities that they can thrive in, and making sure they have the skills to do that. And I think that's part of this. We always look at this one way, like the company taking the job. It behooves every person who's in the workforce to learn and be good at AI. And now it's become so easy. You can do it in natural language. You don't need to know how to program to do this. So it's a two-way street here. You need to make sure that you are showing that you can become AI literate and possibilities of what AI can do, and think through that in your own job. If you're just somebody who's waiting for something to happen, you're probably going to be out of a job if you're just sitting there and hoping AI won't take your job. So that's the way I look at it. I think it's a two-way street. And I think some companies are also using AI as an excuse. I heard this the other day. I wish I remember the name of the company, but I heard it in passing. And what they're doing is they're scrutinizing whether companies who are eliminating roles, and they're saying it's AI. They're actually delving into the details and saying only 22% of those were actually AI, and they blamed 100% on AI. So I thought what a great idea for a company. I thought it was a great idea. They're just going to be able to say, hey, you say you're going to do this, we're going to tell you whether that's real or not real. But that's where I think things are going on this. I think it's a two-way street. I think companies that just want to cut heads, there's definitely waste, and there's definitely old processes that need to be done away with. And those jobs are going to go away. So it depends what the company's approach is. And then if I was the owner of the company or senior leader in the company, I would want to move people on who aren't trying to move on also with where we are with AI, and try to learn, because those people are not going to be successful in the business the way things are heading with AI.
Absolutely, absolutely. So if I'm a small medium enterprise and I'm looking to adopt AI, what are my key considerations before I really start spending hundreds and thousands of dollars on these expensive tools and processes and systems that I'm looking to adopt to?
I think a lot of concern or fear from smaller companies is that they're not trying something. I think that in some of these companies, we may not want to go in and say, hey, we're coming in to do the kitchen sink and redesign your entire company. That might be the goal. You might set that as a vision of what it could be. But today, why don't we, knowing that's a possibility of where you could get to, why don't we do a small project and show you how we can take something that's a current process today that we know is done manually today, that we could use AI to actually automate that entire process. That is a good way to get your feet wet if you're not doing it already and you don't have some of that experience, because nothing really takes the place of experiencing that. I've seen that in our own business. We use AI to do a lot of stuff. And when you see it and you're a part of it, it actually it releases the creative juices in your mind. And you're like, hey, if we could do that, what if we could do this? And I think it creates a nice momentum and circular approach to continuously looking at AI. And again, that's a good way to start. But I see one of the biggest problems in AI today is siloed AI. We're going to fix this process over here, and we're not going to touch the things over here. There's a point of which you can't do that. You've got to be able to look a little broader and say there's a group of things and they interact, and we should change all of those things. But it may be in the beginning you try something to get your feet wet if you haven't already gone down that path. But there's a reason why a lot of companies can't scale AI, pilot, and they try to move it into the rest of the organization, and the DNA of the organization smashes it, right? So again, I go back to, you can't do this without changing the organization and recognizing this is going to be iterative. You're not going to be 2.1 and then 2. Another release in a way you're going to restructure the org. The org will continue to evolve on an ongoing basis.
Right. I think change management is a huge part of adoption of AI for an enterprise. And anybody who's looking to really look deeper into transforming their enterprise to this new of, I would say, growth that we've never seen before or will never experience. I think this is once in a lifetime era that we are looking at, really, because the huge opportunities this is going to create. I love that the fact that you said you wanted to be on the ground and in the mix and and playing rather than sitting on the sidelines. And that's how I feel too. This is way too exciting for us to just set out on this one. And I continue to learn. And from yesterday to today, there's something new. And we tell organizations, let's educate you first before you buy something. Let's not even talk about implementing AI without understanding what AI will really bring to you, your organization, and the outcomes that you may be looking to get. Let's ask, what is 2026 looking like for agentic AI?
We thought last year was maybe the year of agents, but it was the beginning of the year of agents, and that was good. This is really the year of agents. It's really about how can we use agentic AI to go out and do processes, get information, interact with other agents that can delve out and manage another set of agents. We're going to start seeing more and more of that. In the beginning, we're seeing one agent go do this, one agent go do this, and now we're definitely in the era of now agents, multiple agents working together and so forth. Think about it. A year ago, if you didn't know how to code, you couldn't actually create an agent. Today, you can create an agent. Anybody can create an agent.
You don't need to know coding. But I do believe that at the foundation of a good AI system, you still need good old-fashioned software engineering. And I think that's where we've seen some of these rehires at these organizations who are too excited and trigger happy to fire all those people, and then go back and say, let's hire these guys again. Maybe AI is not all that. And they continue to re-educate and retrain those people and into the newer processes.
It's the same problem we were talking about before in general, but when you apply it to agents, you also can't just do siloed agents, right? So if you have 1 million, I won't tell you the name of the company, one of the biggest pharmaceutical companies last year or a year and a half ago decided, okay, we're going to spend, and they spent $1 billion and allowed everyone to go out and create ideas for using AI.
Wow.
Right? And start those pilots and make them work. So they had to do a pilot, right? So in that time frame, they then did an assessment and found out only 7% of those pilots were worth carrying forward. And I think that's an example. Think about it. They spent $1 billion on this. And they learned great things from it. They learned that's not a good way to do this, to just go out and do random pilot. In the beginning, that was okay. Let's try it out. Let's see what we could do. But now you have to do what you were describing, which is you need to come in and look at what are we really trying to accomplish and do this in a little more systematic way. And again, you're going to get the same problem we did with just AI opportunities in general and pilots with agents. You're going to have everybody in the world creating agents. There's going to be collisions of processes. There's change issues. There's structural changes. There's all the change management issues we talked about that need to be addressed. So go ahead, do a few agents like that, try it out a little bit, but there's a point. And again, with software engineering, your point is really good about software engineers. Software engineers have a discipline of thinking through how pieces need to work together. And what we're doing is we're putting skills in the hands of people who don't know how to do that. And so that skill set of software engineering applied to, hey, here's how you have to think about what you're going to build, right? You have to think of the vulnerabilities. You have to think of how this interacts with other processes. And so that planning is important. And then really going back to the point we made earlier, which is you got to think of the business reasons and rationale why you're trying to do what you're trying to do after you get past the little bit of experimentation. I was going to say, don't make experimentation your strategy.
That's exactly right. I think a lot of it is you got to assess and audit your systems before you do anything else. And because is AI for everybody? Let me ask you that question.
I think everybody should be able to use AI to do a variety of things, just to think through. You've seen what they talk about with counseling. People have used it for counseling. People have used it because it has all the methods and approaches. Does that mean you don't need a counselor? No, probably not. But it could also help some people who would never maybe go to a counselor, or maybe it gets them to go to a counselor at some point. But that's an example of a personal thing that people can use in their life. They can use it to solve problems. I was up on a ladder. I took a picture because I could not figure out how to take this light and dim it, make it dimmer. And I took a picture of it and I asked AI, how do I solve this problem? And in 10 seconds, it said, oh, for that, the button's actually hidden. It's over here. Push this and you'll be able to look that down. Just day-to-day stuff like that. I never Google anything anymore. I go straight to Perplexity to do that, or ChatGPT, or I go to Claude to do these things. And whoever you want to use is fine. But those are the ones I typically go to find what I want to find just in day-to-day life.
And that was going to be my very last question. What is your favorite AI tool?
Right now, I'm really enjoying Lovable.
Okay.
And Lovable, for those that don't know, Lovable is basically a natural language rapid prototyping tool that allows you to create dashboards or other similar types of things in a really fast fashion. And it's one of those ones where you can just say, hey, I got an idea. Within an hour, you can have that up and running and Lovable and test it out, see if it makes sense, see what you're thinking. So to me, that's one that's anybody of any level could go into that and play around with that and have ideas and try things out and prototype some things.
That's incredible. I myself love Lovable. I think there are too many tools and we can't experiment fast enough. And every day there is dropping and some incredible technology being introduced. Quick question on Cursor. Yesterday, SpaceX announced that they're going to acquire Cursor for a staggering $60 billion. Do you think it is inflated values, or are we looking at inflated values in AI world, or are those actual justified values?
Well, that's a good question. I would look at it this way. Outside, you would look at that and say, that's enormous amount of money for what you have and what the revenue is and everything. Then I look at the other side of that and I'm like, do you know something I don't know? And that may be, when you look at that X looks at that and says, SpaceX looks at that and says, I see something you don't see. And that may be, the value may be there because of that. So I think you have to look at those things, not just from pure financial, where it is today, but what it could do that maybe somebody hasn't thought of. And again, one more thing on the tools, I tend to use Claude, the latest versions of Claude. I find those very good. I also use ChatGPT for certain things. I find it does better on some things that I like and others. But I'm open. Like when another tool comes along, I like to listen, see what's there, and try them out.
Fantastic. Dr. Andrus, that is incredible. And thank you so much for your time today. I think it has been incredible. One thing people need to walk away from this conversation. What is that one thing that Garth has to tell the listeners out there about AI?
I'll just reinforce it because I think it's important. That is, don't treat AI as a technology implementation. It is a business transformation, and you need change management or you will not succeed.
That's brilliant. Awesome. Dr. Andrus, thank you so much. It's been a pleasure to have you. I think we look forward to having you in our future episodes, I'm sure, and then looking forward to seeing you sometime soon. Thank you.
Sure. Puneet, thank you so much for having me. I very much appreciate it. I've enjoyed our conversation.
Well,
Thank
absolutely.
you.
Pleasure's mine. Thank you, sir.